So before going to the guest speaker, a couple of quick logistic information. So this meeting is being recorded and will be shared on our website. If you do not want your intervention to be shared, please send us an email at info@heatinside.eu. To ask questions and intervene during the session, please, you can raise your hand and you'll be allowed to unmute and turn on your camera. If you prefer to write your question, you can simply use the chat option and we'll read your question out loud. With me today are Olaf Adam, that is the project coordinator of HEAT-INSYDE, and Sébastien Dubois, that is market assessment lead at ENGIE Laborelec. Quickly about their resume, Olaf is a principal scientist at TNO and a professor in applied physics TUE. And last year, together with other colleague, he co-founded Celsius BV. That is the company that will be the market vehicle of the heat battery. Has been working on heat storage for more than 10 years, and as mentioned, is the HEAT-INSYDE coordinator, and he has a very long track record in EU projects. Sébastien Dubois, our colleague from ENGIE Laborelec, is a project manager in thermal processes, and he has a 13-year working experience on waste heat recovery, biomass valorization, and energy circularity, and expert in new technologies evaluation and integration. And he will say a bit about this activity during the presentation. Within HEAT-INSYDE is a work package leader on technology and market assessment. And as Olaf is and was involved in several collaborative projects with the European Union. I think we are ready to start, and I will give the word to our first speaker, Olaf Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco. For those who don't know HEAT-INSYDE, it's my pleasure to give a very brief introduction into the project, to sketch the first picture that gives you some idea about what the project is doing. HEAT-INSYDE is a European project that is being funded in the Horizon 2020 program. It's an innovation action, and it's basically aiming to bring what we call an affordable, compact, and sustainable heat battery solution closer to the residential market. So it's focusing on residential application. And we are talking about the heat battery. What is a heat battery? A heat battery is a storage device that can be charged either by heat and or electricity, and is delivering heat at temperature levels that are suitable for domestic applications, to take a shower or to heat your house. As said, a European project bringing together 12 partners of 6 different countries in Europe. And as the key issue in the EU Horizon 2020 program is to bring technology into application and closer to the market, we have included 3 user-centered demonstration sites spread throughout Europe, one in the Netherlands, one in the south of France, and one in Poland. The project is sized 7.8 million euro, and we started in October 2019. It will be running until March 2024, so we are presently more than halfway. In order to achieve the goals, HEAT-INSYDE mobilizes all the key players in the manufacturing distribution chain of our solution. So we have 3 players forming the, let's say, the knowledge backbone of our project: Eindhoven University of Technology, TNO, and CEA. And we have different players covering the entire chain, starting with the industrial production and manipulation of the material, with the production and design of the hardware, the integration of the hardware into the system, and of course, things related to using the technology, so communication, exploitation, and of course, the players that bring in the market perspective. From today, Today we will focus on that part of the chain that deals with the market perspective, dealing with business models, dealing with market analysis. And Sébastien later on will go into more deeply into go into that. Well, of course, where are we now? We didn't start from scratch. So in 2019, TNO and Eindhoven University of Technology built the first 7 kilowatt-hour demonstrator, a demonstrator which really proves the technology. And nowadays, we have arrived at a prototype which is somewhat in size comparable, but in terms of capacity is already 200 kilowatt hours. The key thing behind the new prototype is that it is a modular design, making it possible to apply the system at completely different scale levels in completely different applications. Basically, the starting points were that we had 2 main breakthroughs. First of all is the development of a very stable, what we call thermochemical composite, a material that's capable of containing a lot of energy, lossless, and that's a key thing. And secondly, the introduction of a completely new device based on what we call the closed loop system principle. So to give a short recap on what are the unique selling points of the technology. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, the storage of our energy is really loss-free, and basically that's not facing any competitor on the market. Secondly, it's a very compact solution, and talking in terms of energy density, it's much more compact than water. Of course, time is playing a crucial role in that. Thirdly, it's basically affordable. We're using very cheap ingredients. It's much cheaper than electric domestic batteries. Fourth, it has an excellent footprint, starting with the basic material that we're using, which is based on potassium carbonate, which is easily recyclable, and the device also has been designed for easy reuse. And last but not least, and despite the fact that we are just talking about the heat battery, it also has the inherent feature of doing the same thing for cooling. So this is in brief what's the project all about, and I'm passing over to Sébastien, who's going to elaborate on the market analysis.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, and hello to everybody. So let's start by a bit of technical explanation. So first, in heat storage system, we have to distinguish, I would say, 2 big family that are solution of heat to heat. So on the left side of this slide, so this is the heat storage system that everyone knows, basically. So where we store hot heat when we have an excess of production, or when we have a low heat price available, and then we release the heat as is when we have the heat demand or a time slot where the heat price could be higher. On the other hand, we have also other kind of system which is categorized in the power to heat application. Mean that here the idea is to recover renewable or electricity at period where the electricity is not able, cannot be used, sorry, and then we use this electricity to store heat in a heat tank, and we deliver the heat at period of time where we need it. So of course the heat storage is always about the dissociation between the production and the use of the heat. So it makes no sense to store heat when you use it, and the opposite. It could be also used to smooth a load variation. Typically in district heating, we used heat storage tank to divide, I would say, the operation of a heating system like a boiler and the grid, where all the customer can ask for a certain heat load at different period of time, and then we use a kind of buffer there. So, sorry. Yes, thank you. Yes, so I was speaking about district heating because this is very relevant for the application we are now developing. And you can see on this slide the evolution of the district heating during the last centuries and nowadays. So we started before, early in the 19th century with a very old-style district heating, providing heat to housing with low efficiency, very high temperature, and so on. And then through the 20th century, the technology was improved, and we try to make them more complex, or at least make them multi-energy system to arrive to the fourth generation, which is not existing yet, but this is the future of district heating. The most important thing to remind for this fourth generation is the level of the temperature inside the district heating, which is much lower than initially. So before, the typical temperature was about 90 degrees C, and for the next generation of the district heating, we are speaking more about 55 degrees C as hot temperature and 25 at the return of the district heating. Another point interesting to mention is the number of technology involved to provide the heat in this kind of system. So it should be understood as, you know, like the grid, the electricity grid, where we have electricity provider and electricity consumer. For this kind of district heating, this is exactly the same philosophy. So you have heat provider and heat consumer. So the idea is to use every kind of heat we could recover from industry, so waste heat recovery application, from usual production system like boiler, biomass boiler, but also from renewable energy, because, and this is introducing my next slide, we have still a lot of renewable energy that we could mobilize, but we are not able to because there is not enough demand. Yes, please. So this is introducing another concept, which is curtailment or economic dispatch. So what is it exactly? So curtailment is the energy which is not produced because of the lack of demand. So it's a waste of renewable energy in a sense, because this is, and I think everyone already see an example of curtailment when you are riding along the speedway, for instance, and you pass front of a wind turbine park, and you can see most of them working, but 1, 2, 3 units are stopped. And I think today in the Netherlands, it's a good example, because when I was coming, you know, I saw that. So this is not because of technical problem or because of safety, because, you know, there is not a lot of wind today, but this is about curtailment, because the electricity demand on the market is not high enough to justify starting new production capacity. And we can retrieve the exact same phenomena in domestic application with a solar panel. Because if you are not connected to the grid or not allowed to inject electricity on the grid, and that your self-consumption is not high enough, then the PV panel are simply not producing electricity at all. But we have the capacity to produce. So in a way, that's a waste of energy. And then in the energy market, there is different strategy to valorize this curtailment. So the not produced energy no, but we could use this in the future. So there's of course there is different scale. Sorry, there is the grid level and the local energy community level. The grid level, of course, it's linked to very high power capacity. So it's very interesting, for instance, to produce hydrogen. And then you can see different kind of project over Europe aiming at developing the hydrogen capacity. And this is mainly to deal with renewable energy curtailment. So instead of not producing or discharging this kind of energy, we will produce hydrogen, and hydrogen is a long-term chemical storage and should be understood as is. At the local energy community scale, so the goal is to maximize the self-consumption of a given energy community. So it means that in your neighborhood or inside your quarter in a city, the goal would be to maximize the self-consumption of renewable energy, so you avoid to consume energy from the grid. There, it makes sense to think about alternative solution, because hydrogen requires a lot of power that is not available at the local energy community scale. So their alternative solution could be interesting. Of course, it should respect the renewable energy hierarchy. So first, of course, it's interesting to store electricity as electricity, so you can use it at different periods of time to operate your electricity consuming equipment. But once or if there is no more electricity storage capacity, then power to heat application is very meaningful, because you extend the period where your renewable energy equipment are working and provide energy. So it's avoiding future consumption of fossil energy, basically. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sébastien. Thank you, Olaf. I think we can open the floor to questions. We already received in the past weeks a few questions via our website and our social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. So I'd like to start the conversation with Olaf and Sébastien. For the first questions, that was one of we receive more often, and is Olaf, what is the going to be the time that the heat battery will reach the market?
Well, that's a good question, because the question is underlining our sincere belief that it is going to be brought to the market. I think that first of all, we of course have to prove the success and understand the client much more, and that's part of the running project HEAT-INSYDE. We already have a vehicle in place to bring our technology to the market. So that means that after the project finalization mid-2024, we will start focusing on industrial upscaling, so the industrial production of the systems that we foresee. And just having in mind that usually the usual time to market is somewhere ranging between 5 to 10 years. We expect that somewhere between 2025 and 2030, the first individual heat batteries will be launched to the market.
Thank you, Olaf. And the second question is also related to business model, and this question like to address it to Sébastien. So what will be the return of investment or the payback time for the heat battery?
Well, so about this, so it's maybe a bit soon to answer this question properly, because the product is still under development, and then we are now modelizing different case study to see how to minimize the payback time and maximize the return on investment. Of course, we are considering collective housing or district heating application, because there we know that we have much more renewable energy available to operate the system. And then we think those market application will be quite relevant. and the results are expected by the end of this year.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And we have one last question for you before we are moving to the questions that are in the chat. These about very practical questions. So about the house of people where the heat battery can be installed. So like we got question, for example, what I still need, will I still need my solar panels, or like will the heat battery work without a heat pump, or in general, which renovation should I do to my house to be able to host the heat battery?
Well, good question. I think some answer were already provided in the presentation. So the first one about solar panel, of course, you will still need a solar panel because, as you maybe understood before, this is a power to heat application. So basically, the idea is to convert renewable electricity from PV or wind turbine into heat to avoid curtailment. Heat pump, the system is perfectly able to work without a heat pump, and because this is about renewable energy and renewable electricity. So here you don't need to supply the heat battery with heat, but with electricity. And about the last question, so I would say that first you should maybe think about revamping your installation, then work on the envelope itself to improve the housing performances regarding heat losses and so on. And then I think basically you don't need to make something special to install this kind of system inside your habitation. It will be, I think, something for local energy community. So yeah, it will be linked to installation of renewable energy capacity, and then coupling the battery with the usual heating system of your house. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. So I'm happy to see that the questions are raising into the chat. So I'd like to move to the first question from Simon. Hi, Simon. Very nice that you join us today after the chat that we had a few weeks ago. So the first question of Simon, I think, is a bit related to, again, the business model part. How does the HEAT-INSYDE compare to companies like SunAmp from the UK? But to be honest, I don't know the company. And what are approximate the levelized cost of storage for a single house and district heating? So I think we are talking about euro per kilowatt hour.
Well, first about SunAmp. So clearly, SunAmp is PCM technology, so a phase change material technology, and this is basically the first product category I have introduced. So this is a heat-to-heat storage system where HEAT-INSYDE is a power-to-heat system. So there is already a first difference there. Well, the levelized cost of energy, let's say, is still under computation because, of course, this is project specific. So we are now trying to identify the best working case where we can increase both the use of renewable energy, but also the use of the heat battery itself. So enlarging and increasing the heat cycling of the battery.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I think that we can move to the second question of Simon, and that what is feasible for economical and technical point of view storage times?
Well, so here, if we are speaking about 200 kilowatt an hour, this is more or less the heat consumption of an household for 1 or 2 weeks, depending on the external condition. Of course, we try to have a higher cycling profile. So that's why we are working on collective housing to reach somehow something like 1 cycle a day. It would be perfect for this kind of system.
I think that from, if I understand the question correctly, from the technical point of view, Basically, once the energy has been put into the system, so when the composites have been charged, then storage is basically unlimited, basically. So from the technical point of view, there is no real drawback. Of course, while using the system, and that's also dealing with another question, you also have to deal with some extent of change in the permeability of the particle bed. And then the economic question comes into play, is what is the amount of cycles that are really needed to have a beneficial system. And we think that this is somewhere in the range between 100 and 200 cycles presently. But that has to be explored somewhat further. So I think that from the technical point of view, this is quite okay.
Thank you. Then I think we can move to two questions from Carl, because I think that are quite connected. So can a thermal solar heating system be used to charge the heat battery directly? And can the heat battery be used with heat pump to generate temperature in excess of 100 degrees for industrial process heat use?
Yes, if I can answer that question. Of course, this is also addressing the, apart from the, let's say, the storage feature of the system using a thermochemical material, it's also addressing, you could say, the heat pump feature of the thermochemical system that we have. And basically what we do is to raise the temperature of a cold source by 40 to 50 degrees. Meaning that the temperature that we could create depends on the temperature of the cold source. So indeed, you can go above 100 degrees. There is, of course, a limit because the 150 degrees limit that we use is primarily determined by the fact that the salt composites will melt at that temperature.
Thank you. And I think that about the first question, that thermal solar heating system be used to charge the heat battery?
Yes, of course. Of course, a thermal solar heating system can be used to charge the heat battery, also even directly. Basically, what we have is, of course, a heat exchanger that is charging the system. And you can also charge the system, of course, using electricity, transferring that into heat and basically drying the composite. But of course, the solar heating system can be used with one boundary condition, that presently the temperature for charging is somewhere around 70 degrees at least. I think in the near future, we will even go down to lower temperatures, starting from 45 degrees.
Thank you, Olaf. And related a bit to the second question of Carl, we also been asked if we, including both HEAT-INSYDE consortium and Celsius, are considering application outside the built environment.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's also underlining the real targeted temperatures. And what's crucial is to consider that basically we are focusing on what we call the low temperature applications. And as I just said, all applications that theoretically are below 150 degrees, but basically usually are much lower. So low temperature applications. Yes, there is a multitude of other kind of applications, and we already explored those applications. And just to mention one, that's the application of this technology in greenhouses, which, if I'm talking about the Netherlands, is a very important area. It's dealing with low temperatures, and it's also dealing with the issue that, especially in the Netherlands, we have to get rid of the gas to heat those greenhouses. The electricity grid is already overloaded. So greenhouse applications is just another example, but there is a multitude of different applications which will be addressed not within the project, but within the vehicle that's there to do so, and that's Celsius.
Thank you, Olaf. And Tino suggests why not for sauna complexes.
Yes,
But,
yes. As I mentioned, there are many different kind of applications. Just to mention another one is also in automotive areas, using vehicles in extreme conditions. This can also be a technology that can be used. But anyhow, electric buses that are consuming a lot of their battery capacity for heating in wintertime. It's also an example or a suggestion that has been made by other stakeholders. Yeah.
Thank you, Olaf. I think we can move to also another question that we got via LinkedIn. Was about Celsius. So on this, I would like both first Olaf and then Sébastien comment on the question. So the question is a bit articulated. So why did Celsius start with a solution for multiple houses? Because there are issues with obtaining agreements with different energy operators. And it's also sometimes, of course, difficult to reach agreement between multiple house owners. So I'd like to Olaf start answering the question, and then Sébastien can integrate from an energy operator perspective.
Yes, okay. Of course, the first thing is to underline that Celsius is a new vehicle, new company that's introduced, and that does more than what we're doing only in HEAT-INSYDE. So the first part of my answer is just from the technical point of view. And the answer is quite simple. It's saying that if you have multiple users of the same volume, bring in different use profiles, it's much more efficiently to have a collective application of the system. That's a very straightforward answer. The second thing is that a collective application that we foresee is also bringing in more flexible solutions for the issue that has been addressed by Sébastien, and that's curtailment. So that's the second part of the answer. And going back to Celsius, Celsius has a somewhat different focus than HEAT-INSYDE, basically also focusing on valorizing industrial waste heat, and then the point of reference are the domestic heating grids. And in that perspective, collective application is much more affordable or much more attractive than standalone application, which does not exclude the option that we can use the same technology also for single houses. And that's what we are definitely also are going to do.
Thank you, Olaf. And Sébastien, from the point of view of energy operator, how these new type of technology are integrated?
Well, there is different answer to this question, of course. So first, you know about curtailment. It's much more easier to avoid curtailment when you have an interconnected grid, you know. So you maybe heard about the contract signed by Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany together to, communitarize their renewable energy production. This is typically to avoid curtailment and to have a interconnected grid. So that's a way to avoid curtailment. Then you maybe heard that the European Commission is promoting local energy communities. So there we should not think about a single housing application, but how together we can optimize a system like a heating system to generate some savings. And then if you look at the individual scale compared to the collective scale, let's say, the possibility to generate energy saving at small scale are also more limited. So it means that, of course, because of the installed power, so you know, in a single houses, you have maybe 7 square meter of PV, and then the excess of energy is quite small. Then if you consider a community with 4, 5, 6 houses together, then you have 6 times more energy to recover and to save. So it's also much more efficient to develop a system for this kind of integration. Yeah, so that's.
Thank you, Sébastien. I think we have few more questions. I think next one from Jeroen, I think is a bit more a technical question, so I'd like to address Olaf about it. So is the battery suitable for e-storage for a longer period of time, days, weeks, months? And if so, what is the maximum amount of time?
Once again, that's also a good question. It's addressing the basics of the thermochemical reaction that we're using. So basically, we are putting together the two components, in our case, water vapor, and a thermochemical salt composite. And when you put them together, heat is released. And the nice thing is you can also reverse that reaction. So you can use heat to split the two, the newly built material into the original components. And as long as you keep the composite dry, so not bringing it into contact with water vapor, the energy that you have used to split the components is stored without any loss. So the answer is, yeah, theoretically you can do that as long as you would like.
Thank you, Olaf.
There was another question.
Yeah, so we have a new question from Carl. So is it practical to charge the salt compound on site and transport it to use for another site? Will you envision some type of market for charging salt compound with waste heat?
I can answer that question easily, because this is basically addressing the main focus that Celsius has chosen. And yes, in that case, we are using a USP that has not been mentioned explicitly in the discussion until now, that we can store heat without loss, but we also can transport heat without loss. And that's really a unique feature. So Celsius is going to focus on using this application, so transporting heat, and to valorize industrial low temperature waste heat, meaning that we are charging the salt at the industrial site. It might also be a data center, and discharging it at a site somewhere in the residential area. So that's the basic system. So the answer is yes. It's a good question, and yes, that's the main focus that Celsius is also choosing.
Yeah, thank you, Olaf. And Victor, we saw your email, and I will come back to you. So we saw your question, and we'll come back to you via email because our battery expert is not here today. So I promise you're gonna hear for us with answer to your question. And about the question for Yaroslav, at the end of the chat, I'm going to put again on screen the email that you contact for that, and also feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and we can discuss cooperation there. I think for the moment I don't see any other further questions, so I'm also checking my list. Sebastian, you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe a last comment about the question about collectivity and so on. So another interesting thing is because of this current period with the energy transition and so on, the European Commission also fixed a target in terms of district heating. So normally the target should be to achieve 50% of the domestic heat provided by district heating in 2050. So it really shows how the European Commission wants to optimize the heating device or the heating system globally. I mean, district heating is also relevant to save money in terms of maintenance, operation, and so on. It's much more easier for energy operator to make the whole maintenance and the whole operation on a single site than trying to organize site visits in single housing. And there, I think this kind of solution could be relevant, even if we consider the fourth district heating generation, which is low heat and where we recover every kind of heat to supply citizen and industry with it. So meaning that there, of course, when we have waste heat or different production capabilities, we can inject heat in the grid every time, But at certain period, it's also interesting to have a kind of buffer. And this buffer could be heat inside system to avoid curtailment, electricity curtailment on the one hand, and provide heat at certain moment where we have an excess of demand, so where the usual system are not able to supply the heat demand, or when we have a lack of other renewable energy sources. So this is another explanation why we think collective application is maybe more meaningful than single housing application to start. Yeah.
Okay. I have one last remark, Francesco.
Of course.
That's it has not been addressed in this session, but I also would like to stress that apart from heating, our technology also is offering the opportunity for cooling at the same time. And it has not been incorporated in the question. It has not been incorporated in our analysis of the market potential applications until now, but definitely it will be something that we have to face in the near future. Just take into consideration that, for example, in Finland, so that's the Scandinavian area, the main problem is not heating, but it's cooling. So I think this is not to start a discussion about that, but just to make a final statement that cooling indeed is also one of the things that we're going to explore somewhat further.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olaf. I think we went through quite all the questions. About the question of Jeroen, if the bathtub was suited storage for days, weeks, month, what is the maximum amount of time?
I already answered that question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And we have one new comment from Tino. If we know the Soltex nano-coated salt.
I can answer that question. Yes, I'm familiar with Soltex, which is a Swedish, originally Swedish company. I think they are basically using calcium oxide, but they are mainly focusing on very high temperatures in a completely different temperature region. And I think it's in the region above 250 degrees. So it's a completely different application, an industrial application. Yes, but I am aware of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Olaf. Then we have a new question from Simon. If you guys we can tell them more about the temperatures that can be achieved with the cooling approach.
Yeah, so that will require, I think, somewhat longer answer, but basically what you could say is theoretically, we can go down to very low temperatures of a couple of degrees. Theoretically.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see. I see that Yaroslav is typing. So in the meantime, we have a new question from Carl. So when CESU brings the product to the market, will they open to exporting to outside the EU? I'm interested in bringing that in New Zealand.
Well, thank you. I think we should stay in touch. Of course, the first challenge is to make it successful within this context. Europe will be a first market, of course. But I'm definitely open to talk with Carl about anything that the future may bring. Yeah.
Thank you, Olaf. Indeed, Carl, we are extremely open for exploring new possibility and collaboration. We'll be very happy to stay in touch. Then we have a new question for Yaroslav. Is it possible to control a dynamic of heat generating by dosing water?
I'm not sure whether I understand the question in this case. Dynamic of heat generating by dosing water. Jaroslav can maybe elaborate on this question. Maybe we should then contact afterwards and see whether I can.
We can help with a more elaborated question.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
In the meantime, I'd like to re-show you for a moment the last slide with our info which you can use to contact us. So there are a lot of information on our website, HEAT-INSYDE.eu, and also you can reach us via LinkedIn and Twitter. We like to keep our community engaged also via a newsletter. So if you subscribe a newsletter, you'll make sure that you stay in touch with our new development. Because in these days, as we speak, we are going to receive the first prototype that will be installed in a house in Eindhoven after the testing during the summer. And this will be integrated in what we call a heat shed. So it's a shed that has integrated a heat battery, a heat pump, and thermal solar panel on the roof. And on our website, you can find all the info. Please follow us there to stay in contact with us. And for the rest, I think for us will be it for today. Unless Jaroslav, maybe if you like to intervene via voice to explain your question to Olaf and Sebastian, we can unmute you. Maybe it's a bit easier than write your question again. Whatever you like.
We can also have contact afterwards if that's preferred. No problem at all. Yeah, maybe that's the suggestion.
Yeah, so I think that for today was it. Thank you very much, Olaf and Sebastian, for the very nice conversation. And I'm trying, so we have a container with salt, and after adding water, temperature rises immediately. Here is so loud. But well, let's say that we'll get in touch with you, Jaroslav. And again, thanks a lot to everybody that is contributed to this session. So it was a lot of very interesting questions, and you'll find the recorder on our website. I wish you all a very nice afternoon, and we'll hope to see you back in the next question and answer session. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.